Good morning. My name is Jamie Horowitz. I'm a member of the National Press Club Newsmaker Committee, and I want to welcome all of you here today. Our guest today will be Mayor Kasim Reed, who's mayor of Atlanta, and he'll be releasing a new report on transportation. I should say that I have one of those Washington jobs where I travel around a lot, and a year ago I was in Atlanta, and they had painted a red X on a third of all of MARTA's buses to show the public buses that might not be on the road because of cuts that were coming. And last week I was in New York City by coincidence on a day when Nassau County, which is one of the wealthiest counties in the country, announced that they were ending their public bus service. And I came back from New York to pick up my free News Weekly in Northwest DC, where they told me that my local bus route was being cut. And so clearly there's a transportation crisis going on and a crisis of funding, and I think that's largely what the mayor will be talking about today. The mayor, although he's an Atlanta native, he's no stranger to Washington. He's a graduate of Howard University and Howard University's Law School, where he currently serves on the Board of Trustees. And he also plays a key role in the National Conference of Mayors, where he serves as the chair of the organization's Transportation and Communications Committee. And this morning he's joined at the head table by the executive director of the National Conference of Mayors, Tom Cochran. The mayor's going to speak for, what would you say, about 20, 25 minutes or so?
I wouldn't do that to you.
and then afterwards, we'll open it up for questions. Mayor?
Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to do a decent enough job to be invited back, so I'm going to be very brief and at least will be memorable for that. I want to thank you very much for joining us. On behalf of the United States Conference of Mayors, I'm just delighted to be at the National Press Club today. Before I begin, I want to thank Parsons Brinckerhoff for sponsoring the United States Conference of Mayors Metropolitan Transportation Infrastructure Survey. And I want to recognize George Pearson, the President and Chief Executive Officer of Parsons Brinckerhoff. Parsons Brinckerhoff is a leader in the development and operation of infrastructure to meet the needs of cities around the world, and is a vital supporter of the United States Conference of Mayors. So I want to thank you to Parsons for all of the hard work that was done on this survey. I come to Washington this morning with a united, bipartisan message from mayors across the United States of America. As the federal government sets priorities for long-term spending and deficit reduction, future federal transportation infrastructure investments cannot be placed on the sideline. And that's why we've asked you all to be here today. We're having a lot of hard, tough conversations about the budget of the country, but in the midst of that conversation, we have to continue to make critical investments in America's cities, and that includes investing in transportation, rather than investing in highway projects that candidly are outdated, and certainly projects such as the Bridge to Nowhere. Mayors are saying today, right here and right now, that given the serious economic challenges facing the nations, we can't afford investments like Bridges to Nowhere or the old projects that were primarily driven by politics. We have to make investments that do something significant, and that is relieve traffic congestion, that is make our environment more sustainable, and that is get people home in a faster fashion. As one mayor said, existing funding mechanisms should be completely overhauled to express genuine support for livable, sustainable, healthy, and economically competitive 21st centuries. Our nation's transportation system is broken, and we came here to make that really clear today. And that's why we brought a copy of this survey that is supported by the mayors of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Because our government has failed to invest in transportation infrastructure in metropolitan areas, home to 2/3 of the country's population, 86% of the United States employment, and 90% of the wage income that's generated in our families comes from cities. And many of these folks cannot get their products to market and can't get to work effectively. And our failure to turn into this challenge is yet another factor that is a drain on our national competitiveness, an issue that we hear talked about more and more and more. We believe that by investing in infrastructure and investing in cities, we turn towards the future of this country. The largest metropolitan areas account for 87% of the nation's traffic. The three most congested areas, Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago, account for 77% of that traffic. And despite that, they don't get the investment that is needed to move people in and out of those cities. Our metropolitan areas rank high among world economies. Metropolitan Atlanta, my home, for example, has a gross metropolitan product that's a lot larger than Colombia and nearly as large as Thailand. Despite that fact, we have a regional transportation sales tax referendum that's coming up next year, where because of the federal government's failure, we're taking it upon ourselves to fund $8 billion in infrastructure because we believe that we can't rely on the help of our federal government. New York's gross metropolitan product is larger than India's gross domestic product and nearly as large as Brazil's GDP. However, they're saddled with bus and rail systems at capacity and aging roads and bridges that will undermine their ability to meet the nation's future economic output. And we just heard about what happened to poor Jamie's bus line. That's just terrible. Simply put, these areas are receiving significantly less in federal transportation investments than would reflect their role and importance to America. The United States Conference of Mayors, led by Tom Cochrane, and the Metropolitan Transportation Infrastructure Survey confirms what mayors have been saying for years, certainly in the last 2 years, that given these factors, metropolitan areas must be at the center of federal transportation infrastructure investment. They are the drivers of the 21st century United States economy. And now that both parties are responsible for this economy, and both parties are responsible for job creation, there is never a better time right now than to invest in infrastructure. And we can't have a conversation that is solely focused on deficit reduction, that does not focus on the one area where there has traditionally been bipartisan support to get a deal to actually put people in well-paying jobs. That's why we're here today. Among the major findings of the survey, with the nation emerging from the worst economic times since the 1930s, 98% of our mayors point to investment in affordable, reliable transportation as an important part of their city's economic recovery, future, and growth. Mayors understand that transportation investment is a catalyst for growth that links private sector's dollars to federal government dollars and leverages them so that more people are helped. More than 6 in 10 mayors say projects have been delayed or canceled due to Congress's failure to enact a long-term federal surface transportation reauthorization. And the instability has been a disaster for planning purposes for cities. We don't know what is happening at the federal level. We don't have a long-term plan at the federal level. So at the local level, when we decide to make decisions on our own, we have no strong partner. We have no clear message. And we need the kind of stability that would come with a long-term funding solution. 96% of mayors believe that the federal government should increase spending on transportation infrastructure to reverse decades of underinvestment in cities, with strong majorities indicating support to increase the federal gas tax to improve transportation infrastructure if a greater share of that funding were actually invested in local road and bridge infrastructure, and of course, public transit. It's interesting, however not surprising, given the increasing road and bridge state of good repair costs, that more than 3/4 of our mayors say that the maintenance of existing roads and streets should be prioritized as well. The reverse is true for public transit. Mayors identified the need to grow public transit, capacity and operating assistance to meet the escalating demand for more public transit rather than just simply maintaining what is already in place. And we know the sustainable attributes of public transit as well. 93% of mayors urge reforms in federal transportation programs to allow cities and metropolitan areas to receive a greater share of transportation funds directly, with 85% calling on federal incentives to help coordinate transportation and housing. In fact, 7 in 10 mayors indicate the support to increase the federal gas tax if a share of that funding were allocated to our local governments. Mayors are on the front lines of building livable and sustainable communities. We are really where hope meets the street. As U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood said at a recent meeting of the United States Conference of Mayors, I've seen some amazing projects that are transforming sprawling, struggling 20th century cities into clean, green, accessible hubs of activity where people choose to live, work, and start a family. We're taking our cues from you, said Secretary LaHood. The lack of funding for bicycle and pedestrian projects is a key issue facing 3 in 5 mayors. These aren't gimmicks anymore. They are part of having a high quality of life in the cities where we live. To meet this challenge, 7 in 10 mayors indicate support to increase the federal gas tax if a greater share of the funding were invested in bicycle and pedestrian projects. To enable their cities to meet the federal transportation matching requirements, more than 3 in 5 mayors say that they have established a dedicated local funding source for transportation improvements. So our local governments are stepping up again and again and again. Some are opposing it, but findings of the United States Conference of Mayors Metropolitan Transportation Infrastructure Survey are intended to shape the national conversation and to shape a federal surface transportation law that will rebuild transportation infrastructure in our cities, reduce traffic congestion, create jobs, and ensure that cities and their metropolitan economies across the United States and in turn the nation's economy emerge from this recession. And really, I thought the jury was out on this when Secretary Geithner prepared his report on the dollars invested in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. One of the few areas that actually generated jobs that you could identify, point to, and verify was the area of infrastructure and transportation investment. While the United States has been disinvesting in urban infrastructure in favor of expansion of highways, we see other countries doing the exact opposite of what we're doing. The United States is investing approximately 2% of our GDP on infrastructure. Europe and China are investing approximately 5% and 9% respectively. Growth in India, China, Brazil, and other surging economies is fueled in part by investment in urban transit system and roads. Thousands of miles of high-speed rail systems are being built in Europe and Asia, connecting populations and economic centers. The sad thing about all of this is that we all know it. Those of us who have the occasion to travel see it right in front of our eyes every single day. And despite the fact that we know it, we aren't doing anything about it to turn the tide. As we watch other countries pass us by, as we watch other economies become more and more competitive. It's more important than ever that federal transportation priorities be targeted to metropolitan areas instead of unsustainable highway expansion. This is important, and this is why we're here this morning. Because in the midst of the conversation that is occurring in Washington, it seems that we have lost our focus on infrastructure investment and that we have lost our focus on how infrastructure investment can lead to well-paying jobs that help people get back to work. I'll be happy to take any questions that you have. Thank you for your time.
And if I could ask anyone who wants to ask a question, please identify yourself and your news organization first. Are there any questions?
Tanya Snyder with Streets Blog. It seems that a lot of times it's at the state level where funds are directed to where the funding decisions are made and often put into highways, and that state DOT leaders often look to highway expansion as a way to address congestion. You're saying that the mayors are asking for public transit, bicycle pedestrian infrastructure as a better way to address congestion. Can you say more about that tension between the state and metro level and why you don't think that highway expansion is the answer?
Well, I'll be happy to. I think that if you look across America's legislatures, there is a dominance of the rural parts of the state that I think creates a bit of imbalance from the economic reality. Now, I like rural folks as much as anybody, but the fact of the matter is when you look at how dollars are deployed at the state level, they're deployed in a fashion that is inconsistent with where jobs are and where the economy is created. Now, that was absolutely fine 10 or 20 years ago when America was the center of economic dominance in the world. But we can no longer afford that kind of differentiation between where the real economy is occurring, where real jobs are being created, and old school politics, which is exactly what that is. I spent 11 years in the Georgia General Assembly. Anytime I needed to get an important bill, I knew that I was going to be in the car for a couple of hours going to see some chairman of a committee who was in Tallapoosa and Houston County or some other part of the state, because there was a dominance in that. I think you see that. I also think you see that dollars that are deployed to states are absorbed in ways that don't generate jobs. I mean, I can speak about my own state. If you look at the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, dollars went to states disproportionately. Now, the fact of the matter is despite the leadership, Tom's exemplary leadership and others, there has been an imbalance between the ability and the political influence of governors, because there's 50 of them, and mayors, where there are a larger number of us. But I think that now we're at a point where the world is watching, and certainly where the country is watching, and where everybody's responsible for the economy and for job creation. A $500 million, or in my instance, $100 million invested in the city of Atlanta, the second fastest growing metro region in the United States of America, has a higher probability of generating new jobs than investing in some part of Georgia where there isn't the infrastructure and jobs don't already exist. And we haven't made that point in a hard enough or fashion that is striking enough. So we're going to continue to make it every single day, and we're not going to be left on the sidelines now that the debate has shifted to deficit reduction, which is why this meeting is so important. So the federal government made the judgment to go out and deploy $798 billion worth of capital. And when you look at that deployment and determine how much of it was applied directly to cities rather than retained at the state level, I believe that ratio would be shocking. It's worse than 90-10, Tom, in favor of states. Now, that's despite the fact that everybody knows that the center of commerce in the United States of America and America's GDP is generated in 80% of its cities. And when we meet with the president and the vice president and members of Congress, they're actually very candid about it, that it has to do with where influence lies. Well, now I think the job should be the most influential thing, and job creation should be the most influential thing. I'm sorry for the long answer. Yes, sir.
That's okay. My name is Sakib Rahima with Climate Wire. Could you talk about more specifically how you'd like to change the relationship of cities to the federal government?
Well, we'd like to change it by having a more direct relationship with it. Anytime there is a transportation funding initiative, whether it's TIFIA, whether it's an infrastructure investment bank, there needs to be a conscious decision to create a direct stream that goes to cities without the involvement of the state. Cities will receive the money faster, you will see jobs get generated faster, and you will have a cleaner line of responsibility. We're seeing that right now. The city of Atlanta won the largest Tiger II grant in the United States of America. We run a $47.6 million grant out of $600 million that was deployed, 1,700 people that applied. We do not have any involvement with the state of Georgia regarding that grant, and we've already taken that $47 million and leveraged $100 million in investment. We're going to generate 800 construction jobs hard that are verifiable, and we're going to create a train line that ends half a mile away from this development we call the Atlanta Beltline, which is our effort to create 1,100 acres of green space and a more walkable and livable community where we're already investing hundreds of millions of dollars in the Atlanta Beltline. But the piece that the government funded, that President Obama's administration funded, will connect the interior of the city with the exterior of the city by creating a train line that goes from the Atlanta Beltline into downtown Atlanta. So the point I'm making is we had no involvement with the state around that. We put forth an application that met several criteria, and we won, and we're funded. And you can see already the impact of that. One, when the recent congressional negotiations were going on around the budget, we had already encumbered and deployed somewhere near 20 million of $100 million. But when you look at other investments at the state level, it takes longer for the money to get drawn down and deployed and put into the stream of commerce. So I just think we do it better than other areas because we're living it every day.
I also thought I would mention that if anyone would like to address questions toward Mr. Cochran, too, he's agreed to take questions as well. Other questions? Yes.
Yes, I'm Dennis Moore with Bond Buyer. First of all, are you having any problems now with municipal finance bonding in terms of rates or ability to sell that could be solved or at least ameliorated by the TIFIA, Infrastructure Bank, that sort of thing?
No question. TIFIA and the Infrastructure Bank particularly. Everyone knows about Mayor Villagros's 30-10 effort or fast-forward effort as it has been recently named. What you're seeing at the local level is we're taking it on and figuring out how to fund it ourselves. So it makes sense as the government moves to a greater focus on the deficit that they provide financing at very low interest rates because it does not add to the deficit, which is so troubling, but it does generate the same kind of impact. I mean, I will give you an example. Right now, we're getting ready to go to the voters with a referendum in 2012 that will yield $800 million a year in cash hard over a 10-year period of time, and we have no partner. Now, in my mind, local communities that step up with their own skin in the game, such as a local community that is taxing itself, putting up $8 billion worth of capital, ought to have a strong government partner for financing. So if you're a deficit hawk and you don't want to add to the nation's credit card, and I understand those who say that, at least facilitate a low-interest loan to a credit-worthy entity. Now, the state of Georgia happens to be one of 8 states in the United States of America with a AAA bond rating by all 3 major rating agencies. So it seems to me that that would be a good partner for a low-interest loan. Now, we're bonding our debt on a 10-year note, which is strange. We should actually, in my mind, have a 20-year note, which would leverage $16 billion. But if we were to do that, we should certainly have a strong federal partner. And right now, the complexities tied to federal loans are simply too complex, which is why, and we still don't have an infrastructure bank bill. And that just, I don't know how we don't have that. I mean, because you have to be credit worthy, and the project that you're funding has to be worthwhile and has to go through all of the appropriate level of scrutiny. So I don't know why that has not been done. I know that it has been an initiative. I know that it has been talked about. But there have been multiple reports that infrastructure is the way toward well-paying jobs and job creation. There has traditionally been overwhelming bipartisan support for infrastructure, so we can't get lost in the deficit conversation. And sooner or later, because unemployment is still at 8.8%, sooner or later, folks are going to demand jobs. So I believe that by having events like today, we put up an alternative that is real and viable and that is ready, as opposed to folks who are just talking about jobs. In the city of Atlanta, we've lost 54,000 jobs in our construction sector over 5 years. So that is 54,000 people that had a well-paying job, and there's no vertical construction going on in the city of Atlanta. And we used to have skyscrapers, cranes being built all the time. Construction really built our city. So you have no residential construction going on because of the housing market, no vertical construction going on because of the capital markets, and because you have too much office space available for leasing.
Jason Platts with Greenwire. You talked about the importance of having a long-term bill for certainty. What do you think about a 2-year bill versus a 6-year bill?
I think a 2-year bill is better than what we have, which is nothing. I think that 2 years would give some stability, but I think what we're asking for is at least get a deal. We don't know what the rules are. I mean, we certainly have some sense of the administration's approach. But we don't know what the rules are. We don't have any certainty. So I take 2 years over where we are today. Obviously, my preference is for 6 years, but with the new political environment, that's very tough. But 2 years would at least give us a guidepost and clear rules now that both parties are responsible for the economy.
Yeah, I'm Ryan Hollywell with Governing. I just wanted to clarify, you're talking about how you don't think that highway funding should be a priority, but obviously a lot of the congestion sort of in and around cities aren't just city streets, they're also state highways, especially
Yes.
like loops and beltways and things like that. Yeah. So are you saying that just like transit is a better way to address that problem, or just that money should go directly towards the city to address those?
No, I'm saying that new road construction, we support maintenance and repair and arterial improvement. So when you can take steps to improve what you have, we believe that that's appropriate. I think our overarching message is that new highway construction, new road construction really should fall significantly as a priority for America. Because we believe we have roads that are sufficient, unless you're talking about arterial improvement. Meaning taking a lane and adding flexibility, adding hot lanes, taking additional measures to make the arteries we have, if you will, a little more healthy. So we think that's an appropriate investment, and we think maintenance should remain a high priority. Otherwise, we're going to have to go back in and rebuild things anyway. So, but this public transit space, it's just been a disaster nationally in terms of what's happening with public transit. And public transit fits with both a Republican and Democrat national priority, which is to make the country less reliable on fossil fuel. And both our Democrat friends and our Republican friends have said that they want us to be less dependent on foreign oil and to reduce that. And at the exact same time, they are giving us the tools in cities to get people out of cars and on trains to create walk paths and bike paths and make that a reality. And the younger generation is clearly moving into that space in a decisive way. Younger people, if given the opportunity to live in a more environmentally friendly way, are choosing it. When you look at the people that have moved into the city of Atlanta, they're young people. Folks between 25, 38 years old. And they want to walk and bike in a way that I think is different from my parents' generation and even me.
I think I'd like to ask a question. It seems like the price of gasoline is becoming an issue and will likely be an issue in 2012. Are you and other mayors supporting an increase in the gas tax?
Not at all, because an increase in it wouldn't reach us. So as I said, the only time we're going to support anything on a going forward basis is if we have a direct relationship with it. So the time when we're going to stand by and watch appropriations being made to cities and have a flow through states is just is not going to. That's just not going to stand. And we're going to make as much noise and use as much political influence, really, to bring that to a close. It is wrong for America, and I really understand the political calculation about it. But I believe that this jobs issue and the issues related to the cost of fuel are going to trump the political imbalance that has caused it. So we will not be supporting that until the issue of direct funding for cities is addressed in a direct fashion.
Other questions? Well, I just want to bring everyone's attention to our next newsmaker. Tomorrow will be with Craig Fugate, who's the administrator for the Federal Emergency Management Agency. But it's been our pleasure having the mayor today, and I think you and Mr. Cochran will stick around if anyone has any follow-up questions. But I want to thank everyone for coming today. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.